last video I put up, I asked for recommendations for a short story because I plan to be reading as a project for next year, taking one short story and reading it every week of 2026, so that by the end of the year I've read it at least 52 times in total. And a bunch of people gave some really good recommendations. I appreciate all of them. I looked into each story, and each one was worthwhile to pursue and to find it and to read it, at least from the outset. I haven't read each individual story, but I selected the recommendation given to me by Jim from Mystery and Mayhem, and it's Raymond Chandler's Red Wind. I've recently got this volume of Chandler's stories, which includes Red Wind, and so starting on January the 3rd, which by the time I put this up, this should be the Saturday immediately following whenever this video goes up, I'll be starting in on Red Wind. So if anybody else is as crazy as I am and wants to follow along with that, yeah, you start January 3rd, start reading Red Wind, and by the end of December 26th, we should have read it at least 52 times by that point. And we'll see what we figure out, what we learn from the whole process. Okay, so to the books by the foot totals for the end of the year. See, let me flip through here. When we started the year, okay, so this looks like we started the year at 35 feet. Well, approximately 36 feet once you average everything up. Ending the year, we are ending with 56 feet, 4 3/4 inches of unread books on my bookshelves. So we've, added a couple things here and there throughout the year. Just stockpiling stuff in case the snow gets too deep. Here just recently, the things I got just recently. One, I got this volume of Chandler stories. Picked this up just recently. This has his short stories and then a few of his early novels. I also picked up this Raymond Chandler biography by Tom Heine. I'm going to be reading this next year at some point. I'm not exactly sure. As part of the Red Wind reading, I figure like at a certain point, it would be beneficial to me in understanding the short story, especially after I've read it several times. They take a look at the author, Raymond Chandler, and some of his other pieces of fiction, and see how that can inform my reading of Red Wind. So that's why I got this. And as a Christmas gift, I got these two books. This is Meddling Kids, which is sort of a is a take on Scooby-Doo, obviously, for more of a, hesitate to say mature, but for a more adult audience, to get more, a little bit more blood and guts, I think, than a normal Scooby-Doo episode would give you. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm looking forward to that. I'm a big fan of Scooby-Doo. I'm very, not serious, but I'm very passionate about Scooby-Doo. I like that series a great deal. It means a lot to me, and just the avenues it put me in as a kid to discover different things inside fiction. It was great. The other book I got for Christmas is the complete short stories of Jorge Luis Borges. And I'm not saying that correctly in the way it should be pronounced, but that's the best I can get right now. I've been on a kick lately to study Spanish. I'm not able to speak Spanish, but I'm able to understand more of it than I previously had, which I think is exciting to look at certain things and like, oh, I'm not entirely in the dark. I don't understand Spanish, but I don't understand it in a different way, in a different capacity than I didn't understand it previously. So that's good. But anyways, my hope with this one is, as I'm studying Spanish, I hope to be able to read one of these stories in its entirety unaided by the end of 2026. So just being able to sit down and read it without having to look things up or to spend a great deal of time trying to puzzle out what the sentences mean, just to read it as a piece of fiction. Now, one of the stories in here, there are more things I'm already more or less familiar with the story because I listened to a reading of an English translation of that, which clued me in onto Borges as an author. Borges, I'll get it. Well, I'm looking forward to this. This is going to be a lot of fun. So that's all the recent acquisitions to Books by the Foot, and that's all in the ultimate total of that 56 feet and some change that I'm working with now going into 2026. One of the things I do throughout the year, and this is before I was even doing Books by the Foot, I've been doing this since 2016 or 2017, is just keeping a written list of everything I read throughout the year. And I have this written out to books, whether that be fiction and nonfiction, just all normal prose novels or nonfiction books get put into the same category. That's one category. The next category is audiobooks of whatever length, whether that's 15 minutes, whether that's 6 hours, they all go into the same list. So that gets a little squirrely with the numbers there. It's a little inflated for how many minutes I was actually listening to audiobooks, but it all gets thrown in the same pot. And then the next category is for trade paperbacks and graphic novels, comic book collections. I put all those in the same category. There is a distinction between a trade paperback and a graphic novel, as a certain Paul Schultz will be quick to tell us. But I put all of them in the same category as far as just keeping a list of them of what I read throughout the year, because they're approximately equal length and in the same medium. And then the fourth category I keep track of is single issue comic books read. So just like, it's not a graphic novel, it's not a trade paperback, it's just one issue of a comic book. I keep track of how many of those I get through in a year. So the numbers of books. I read 58 books throughout the year, which is surprising. I thought that number was going to be closer to 40 even. But I was reading like an absolute madman. In January, I finished about like 9 books. And then in November, I finished a whole bunch. And just like throughout the year, somehow all these totals added up to 58. Now, a lot of those weren't extremely long. A lot of those were, several of those were short reads that I did in conjunction with some booktube stuff that was going on, like Ebes or the Elbrick reading event that Tim from Secret Fire Books was doing. So a lot of them were pretty short, and that helped to get that number up. Audiobooks, I listened to 73 audiobooks. And like I say, most of those were going to fall in between the half hour and the hour and a half range, which is a lot there. But most of them were in around an hour mark, more or less, probably on the lesser side. I'd say most of that was from 3 channels specifically. Horror Babble, which most people know about. Quasar Spectra, which has one of the best audiobook channels on all of YouTube. It's Quasar Spectra. He reads pre-1990s speculative science fiction, which he's just covering the whole gamut of stuff pre-1990s. And he's a good reader, and there's some great stories on that channel. If you like audiobooks, you should check him out. And some other ones, just like Edward French, or this guy's name is Tony Walker. I forget the name of the channel, but he reads ghost stories, and he just recently started up another channel where he reads, and he hires on other people to read classic detective stories. He does a really good job, so I recommend those channels. On the trade paperbacks and graphic novels, I read 23, which is less than I thought it was going to be. I thought I had read several more than that, but it's probably one of those things where I was reading fewer graphic novels and more novels, is why those numbers kind of got differentiated in my thinking, because previous years they were a little bit more similar. On the single issues, I read 41 individual issues of comics this year, which is kind of low. And in previous years, they usually be around maybe 70 or 80. It's just the fact that this year I didn't buy as many single issue comics. I was rereading several and just kind of working through a pile of stuff that I had gotten previously. I hadn't gone out and bought a great many individual comics like I would have previously. So, and I want to move on to just a few books that throughout the year I just want to highlight without having to go through like the entire list of things I've read or listened to. On books, I want to point out that I really liked throughout the year. Of course, I got to mention House on the Borderland. A bunch of different people have been reading that this year, and they're all highly impressed. And I got to put myself in the list. I really enjoyed that book. I read it. I listened to the audiobook of it over the summer when I was out hiking, and that really was the best avenue to listen to that audiobook. Is when you're kind of like a little bit isolated out in the woods to listen to House on the Borderlands. It was really good. Also by William Hope Hodgson, who wrote House on the Borderland. Listen to the audiobook for the Voice of the Night. It's just a great story. This year alone, I've probably listened to that, I don't know, 4, 5 times maybe. The reading by Horror Babble, the reading by the narrator Edward French. He has the best one, I think, to listen to The Voice of the Night. A couple of books. I'm going to show some books here. They're on the list, but a couple that I don't have handy to show you, but I want to mention. One is Killing Town by Mickey Spillane. That was the first Mike Hammer novel I ever read, and I was kind of iffy because I wasn't exactly sure the territory I was getting into, but I was blown away. It was wall-to-wall action and intrigue, and it just kept me the entire time. I finished it in like an afternoon and a half. Like it just ripped through that. It was great. After that, I tried reading another Spillane novel, but it was one of the way, way later ones, and it just wasn't exactly the same. But Killing Town was on top. I liked that one. The other novel was Moby Dick. I want to make an effort to read more classic fiction. Not all at once, not like to swamp myself with it, but just like over the years, just kind of like every year, every half year, pick a classic book and try to get through it just so I can be more or less familiar with classic American fiction. And I was really impressed by this one. It's different than what I had been led to believe that it was. It's really, it is really just an expose, a fictional documentary piece on whale fishing, whale hunting, and all that. It's pretty much Ken Burns' documentary before it existed. Before there was a Ken Burns, there was a Moby Dick, sort of in that vein. And I don't have this one with me, but I want to bring it up just because of how aggravating it was to read. And that was the trade paperback collection titled Wonder Woman, Love and Murder. And after I read that, I went and I recorded a 20-minute or so rant, just kind of like vent my frustrations with the book and how terrible it was. Obviously, I never released it. You can't find it. I don't think I ever going to, just because I don't want to necessarily be that negative for an entirety of a video. This is so frustrating. Like nothing, anything that was almost correct had glaring issues with it. That like anyone who, I'm getting into it again. If you understand comic books as a medium, or just generally how to tell a story within the comic book format, it's frustrating. If you understand the history of DC Comics, like the internal history of DC Comics as it stood when this book came out, it's frustrating. If you understand Wonder Woman as a character and the general history she has within comic books and her characteristics and traits, it's abysmal. Like, every step is a stumble in this book. It's frustrating. But I just wanted to bring that up. It was a highlight of the year for how aggravating the book was. And I cannot recommend reading it. If you see it, the title is Wonder Woman, Love and Murder. If you see it out in the world, ignore it. There's 10,000 other stories better to read. Even Wonder Woman's story is better to read. It's a shame that she gets shortchanged in every capacity. She's too good a character to keep getting such rotten stories as that. But anyway, I'm going to go on to some different books here. On top of the heap, we have Tom Strong and the Planet of Peril. Bring this out. This particular, it's trade paperback. It collects 6 issues of the miniseries Tom Strong and the Planet of Peril. It's not particularly great. This is 6 issues. In the regular series of Tom Strong, this probably would have been at most 2 issues, maybe just 1 issue. But like I say, this was written at a time when there had not been a Tom Strong book for a really long time. And especially with this story where it is a very specific counter-Earth called Terra Obscura, and that had its own series. And so like anybody coming to this, they're mostly just coming to this as sort of like a family reunion with the 2 series of Tom Strong and Terra Obscura, just kind of hang out a little bit. But yeah, like Tom Strong for me is like one of the best comic books out of the 90s. It was, the first issue came out in 1999, so really it's more of a 2000s type book. But it's one of the best comic books, one of the best independent comic books that came out at that time. Really top-notch action adventure. I want to say it's like golden age science fiction type stuff, but it's more than that because it takes the whole gamut of action adventure science fiction pulp type stories from the 1920s to present day. It's sort of this broad overview, and it's really well put together, especially the first couple volumes where Alan Moore was the chief writer on the series. He eventually left the series, and other people took the writing duties for each individual issue or pair of issues. But it's really a top-notch series, and I want to get more into that next year and reading it again, and possibly even talking about it on the channel, because it really is just a fantastic series to look at if you like golden age science fiction type stuff. I'm talking about stuff like Tarzan or Doc Savage or the old golden age comic books and silver age, bronze age comic book stuff. Really fantastic. Another one I read during the year, Elseworlds Superman. And I won't I'm talking too much as it is, so I won't get into all of what Elseworlds is for DC Comics. This one has the famous Superman World of Worlds issues in here. It also has, you see it on the cover, it's like Superman in the Civil War. That one was a bit of a lackluster story. I thought World of Worlds was fun. The best one, though, let's see, where is it? I'm trying to find it. I don't remember the name of it, and it's hard to get at. Oh yeah, Superman Inc. I think that was the best story. It's kind of like it's kind of a story of like what if Superman was raised different, you know what I mean? And he ends up becoming a sports superstar, unbeknownst like of the full potential of his superpowers. And it's really good in its process because it shows how even though Superman, if he wasn't raised by the Kents, it's always just like well, he could be a totally different guy. Well, he is a totally different guy, but his circumstances bring him around to embracing the virtues of Superman as we normally understand them, like the honesty and the integrity and the humility of Superman. That story for me stands out in that even above the Superman World of the World story or any of the other ones. Even though this volume is really good, I like Superman. He's not the coolest superhero, but he is the best superhero. And so I'm always happy to read more Superman. The other one I want to bring up, this is the Jack Kirby Omnibus Volume 2 from DC Comics, covering that brief period of time when Jack Kirby was an employee at DC. He was only there a few years during the 70s because he left Marvel. And Jack Kirby, it's hard if you're inside comic book spaces. Like everybody sings his praises. Like you can't say enough about Jack Kirby. But it's still one of those things. Like he's so underrated for everything he brought to not just American comic books as a whole. The energy and the vitality of his stories. And I'm not gonna say everything he did was absolutely at the top of the heap. But creatively, he was a giant. He dwarfed everybody else creatively. And in his best stories, when he was hitting all cylinders and he was passionate and he was really serious about what he was doing. It's some of the best panel comic book storytelling that can be found. His stuff on the early issues of The Demon, which is Etrigan, all that stuff, like that's some of the best fantasy horror comic books ever. I mean, not even just for the 70s, I mean, ever. It's some of the best stuff you're going to find in the first 3 or 4 issues of The Demon. Getting into some books from the year, I'm going to start off top here with Gate of Ivral by C.J. Cherryh. I bought this either early in the year or sometime last year. And then Tim, Secret Five Books, and Kevin Toll Reads, they were going to do a buddy read of this. I wasn't part of the buddy read, but I knew they were going to be doing it, and so that kind of spurred me on to read this and just go ahead and get it out of the way. And I really enjoyed this. I've read this, and I've read the sequel, Welsh Yuan, and I like it so much that I may end up making a video on the 2 books I've already read so far. There's 2 more in the series. I'm really impressed by it. The covers make everything out to be like the sword and sorcery, high action, high adventure type of tale, and there's action and adventure in it, but that's not really what it's about. It is there's a little bit of politics, of like court intrigue in it, but that's not really what it is either. It's just a really, really subtle romance novel. The series as a whole is just like this really, really subtle, everything kind of beneath the surface and unstated, and just kind of left for you to work out on your own with between the romance with these 2 people. And I really appreciate it. I like it more than I ever thought I would like any romance novel ever. And if you had sold it to me as that, I wouldn't have read it, because I would have thought everything would have been too surface level, like a lot of that stuff ends up being. But like it's really well done and well crafted, so that like the romantic elements for a lot of people really just go unstated. But I don't know if they're getting as much out of the book as they could, at least not as much getting out of the book as I'm getting out of it, reading those elements as present. So yes. One thing I want to bring up is The Ice King, and this is there's an alternate title for this, which is Burial Rites. This is a book that was covered on Elusive Exclusive Book Society. I wasn't part of that live stream either, but I was going to go ahead and read the book because it caught my interest. And this is an example of a book that, in my memory, it had particular ideas that were intriguing, but the execution faltered in that it focused on the wrong characters to move the story forwards. But I don't have to rehash that. I think I have it in one of the really early Books by the Foot videos. Yeah. This next one, The Night Stalker. Now this is the novel for the TV movie The Night Stalker, which has started as an unfinished, unpublished book, was made into a TV movie, and then Jeff Rice, he finished his novel and published it in conjunction with just a few months after the TV movie came out. You know, at the time, it was the most watched television movie in all of history. At the time, it's since been ousted by other things. I read this and watched the television movie as part of a live stream collaboration I was doing with Nick from the Book Graveyard. That was a lot of fun. I keep meaning to find some other project to get Nick involved in again, just so we can have another live stream. That was a lot of fun to do and to get at and exchange ideas about this book. Like the series is one of my favorites. I love the 2 TV movies. I love the television series. The book I had more mixed feelings on, but it was still worthwhile to read and to have that experience. The other one was another one, The Destroyer number 33, Voodoo Die. And this is something Nick invited me onto the Elusive Exclusive Book Society to read this book. So I was a participant in that live stream. And the book itself is it's kind of mid. It has its moments where it's a little humorous, but I wouldn't put a lot of effort in trying to seek this one out. The great thing about that live stream, from my point of view, is One, well, we did talk about the book, and we did have a fun discussion on all that, but it was kind of a setup so that the guys from Eves could kind of ambush me about the novel that I had written. And if I had been thinking about it, I would have had a copy of it sitting here. But yeah, they kind of ambushed me to talk about my own novel, and that was real nice of them. They didn't have to do that, and it was a boost of confidence for me because I know that if my book was just absolutely terrible, they wouldn't have brought it up. So the fact that they even did that for me means that there must have been something in that book to make it worthwhile. So thanks to everybody there. Another book I read early in the year, this was a reread early in the year, is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. I don't have to go into too much of this. Everybody knows pretty much what it is. And if you don't know what it is, you should pick up a copy and read it. This is a book that I will be reading this for the rest of my life, I'm pretty sure. Like, you know, I might not reread it again in 2026, but at some point in the future, I'm going to be looking at it again, and then in the future again and again, just coming back to it. It's just good. It's just a good book about books, essentially, which is going to grab every reader's attention. So I really like this one. Another one I read early in the year is Flaming Crimson, A History of Sword and Sorcery. This is by Brian Murphy. I watched an interview he had done where he was talking about the history of sword and sorcery. I'm like, this guy's good. I'm going to go find his book, and I did. And it's really, I'd say really, really good. That doesn't put all the words in place that I want to say about it. It's really in-depth. It's going to give you a focus, a broad overview and a focus to understand sword and sorcery as like this publishing phenomena. And just as the stories in general, like from their origins in Weird Tales, is just like a branch of historical fiction, like action adventure historical fiction, kind of branched off into this sword and sorcery thing with Conan. There had been previous stories and novels from like the 20th century and all that, not the 20th century, like the 19th century, more fairy tale type stuff that more or less fit in the mold of sword and sorcery, but it was nothing had coalesced into the definitive shape until Robert E. Howard and Conan, and he takes it and he goes over the previous stuff, and then he hits a hefty chunk on Robert E. Howard, and then he goes off into the way it kind of fell off in the 50s and 60s, and then came back to life in the 70s and the 80s and hit real big and kind of sloughed off again, and how that come to the grimdark stuff, kind of like Black Company, and he gets into all the nitty gritty. And so if you can find a copy of this, it's worthwhile to read if you like books in general, if you like the history of different types of genres, if you like sword and sorcery specifically. There's books I didn't know existed until I read this, and I went out and I found some of them to check out just because they were mentioned in here. And on those lines, I mentioned this early in the video, Tim from Secret 5 Books had a reading event from July, and it just wrapped up this month in December, to read the 6 main books in the Elric saga written by Michael Moorcock. And so I was reading those. I had a 2-volume set of these books. I may end up getting into all the things I would have to say about Elric would be too long to add to this already long video. So I'll probably put that in its own separate thing. It's one of those things. I wanted to read this. I wanted to read all the Elric books because of their significance in fantasy and in sword and sorcery. Just so I would be familiar with the bigger names, the main titles of fantasy and sword and sorcery. So when Tim said he was going to do this reading event, I was like, I hopped on because it was a perfect opportunity just to get these things out of the way and over and done with. So yeah. If I mention anything about Elric, it'll be in its own video. Another one, this was a reread, is The Old Gods Waken, a Silver John novel by Manly Wade Wellman. Silver John the Balladeer, just plain John, whatever he ends up being called, is an occult detective by the author Manly Wade Wellman. A rural folklore occult detective type stories They started off in short stories, and then eventually Wellman wrote 5 different novels. This was the first of the novels. They're not. Each novel will reference previous stories, but it's not necessary to read them in order. These had a really big impact on me when I read them. It's just that that like deep South Appalachian type presence in a fantasy story, in an occult horror weird tale type of story really had an impact on me. I was like, okay, I can do that. And that a lot of the elements from Silver John directly inspired different things that were in my novel, The Sunken Door, and in different stories I've written. I think I have it here. I have a story, Ain't Nobody Down There, which I can't underestimate how important Manuel Wellman and the Silver John stories are to this short story. Just in its inspiration and in showing that like that deep South Appalachian thing can be done in this context of the weird tale. It was very it was inspiring. It was reassuring that it could be done, that somebody had already accomplished that, and I just had to like come around and investigate and figure out how everything was accomplished. And then early in the year, I think we'll wrap it up after this. Well, I say early in the year, this was around March or around April or May or something. I decided I want to read just a bunch of like Mars stories, and I got to a couple of them. One was Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis, which was his Mars tale. I've read this book at least a half a dozen times, and it may be another one of those that I just keep reading again and again and again. It's simple, but in that simplicity, it is direct. It doesn't waste time. It's a really short read, a really quick read. You can read this whole thing in just an afternoon, which makes it so easy to read again and again and again. But it's fun. It's imaginative. And like I say, it's just a feel-good kind of novel. You know, you just kind of sit down and you're allowed to... Reading this novel, like there are points in it where there's some danger, some like immediate danger and tension to the protagonist. But the majority of the book is the equivalent of taking a stroll in somebody's rose garden. You know what I mean? It's just very soft and leisurely, and there's no pressure to race by. You know, you don't have to see everything all at once, and you don't have to busy yourself with trying to get all the things done. You can just take your time and relax while you're reading it. For that, I appreciate this book a great deal. And the other Mars story I read was a reread of A Princess of Mars, which at this point I've probably read it about 3 or 4 different times. I should have, by this point, have read the sequel, The Gods of Mars, but for whatever reason, I just haven't gotten around to it yet, even though I've read A Princess of Mars 3 or 4 times. Edgar Rice Burroughs is one of my favorite authors. Tarzan of the Apes is perhaps my favorite novel ever. That's another novel I've read at this point maybe 5, 6 times. And I just can't get enough of that one. Yeah, the impact... It's talking about impact. Like the impact Edgar Rice Burroughs have on me as an author is immeasurable. Just because, and this is going to sound like a very backhanded compliment, Edgar Rice Burroughs is not very good at most things, but he's hugely successful, and the things he does well, he does fantastically, immensely. He does great. The flaws of a Burroughs book are self-evident, and you don't have to harp on those too much. The virtues of a Burroughs book are immense. They're unmatched. 98% of all modern authors can't even touch Edgar Rice Burroughs and the things he was doing well in terms of action, in the flow of the plot, in the emotional payoff. And it's the weirdest thing. Like Burroughs' characters are generally a little flat, a little weird, a little contradictory in their motivations sometimes. The dialogue is absolutely atrocious. And everything relies on like these, even at the time, these worn out tropes of how characters behave. And yet, emotionally, everything hits. Like you understand, like even if you don't feel it, you understand it completely as to why everything's happening. Every character is making each decision, and like the impact of it, and it is emotional context, and in the terms of the action, the flow of action, the course of action, the pace of the story is it's unbeatable. Like he can't be matched by any modern author alive. He's unassailable, untouchable. But anyways, uh, just to recap, that was my books by the foot totals. We're at 56 feet, 4 and some odd change inches on the shelf going into next year. I will be reading Red Wind on January 3rd, and then every week thereafter, updates as I go along, and start going insane from reading the exact same shortest story 52 times, at least, in a year's time. I hope to see you then. Bye-bye.